Ableton 12.3 just landed, and if you've seen the feature rundown linked in the top right, you already know it's a serious upgrade. But the real magic isn't just what Ableton added, it's how you set it up. So today, I'm walking you through a 12.3 workflow template that will speed up your track building and make your mixes hit harder. Ready? Let's dive in. We'll come to everything that's going on in this template in just a bit, but let's set 12.3 up for success. Following on from 12.3, we got the option to bounce group in place or to a new track. There's not a keyboard shortcut for it, so let's make one. I like to bounce stuff in place quite often, so let's keybind Command, Shift, and P. You can do this by going to your system settings, navigate to keyboard shortcuts, app shortcuts, and hit the plus icon to create a new shortcut. Choose Ableton Live 12 as your application and then type in your menu direction exactly as it appears in the drop-down menu. Then type your shortcut of choice. For me, Command Shift P. I might be alone in this, but I don't actually like the sound of Live's clicks. We get 3 options for the metronome, and I want something a little less ear fatiguing. So my metronome now sounds like this. You can change this by swapping the initial click sounds in your default metronome folder. Just export your 2 tones as metronome up for the first sound and metronome for the second. Replace them with the original sounds, go into your Ableton contents folder, app resources, MISC, metronome, and then samples. Splice is now integrated into Ableton, so I make sure that this is open on default. Make sure you're logged in and come down into the bottom right here and make sure that sync to project is turned on. This will make sure that your samples are automatically synced to the global key signature of your track. I've got a sample here, and if I change my key signature from C to F major, automatically pitching this sample down for semitones. In this template, I've made sure that I add this splice lane so that I can drag my samples straight out to this pane right here. We'll get to more of this template and give you a complete overview in just a touch. We're not going to add a stem separation track into this template because that can be dragged into any audio region. However, I would ensure that stem separation is in high quality mode so that we're always getting the best stems. That can be achieved by adding a code in the options.txt file. What you want to do is save a plain text file as options.txt with a capital O. As you can see, I've already created one in the past. Enable arm on selection, which allows me to just arm any track that is selected and show device slots. When I hit tab and I'm in the mixer view, I can see all of the plugins that are on each track. I'm going to add this new cheat code. Feature.stemSeparation.highQuality equals true. Now, when you right click a sample and come down to separate stems to new audio tracks, you now have this high speed, high quality slider. Okay, now let's get to everything that you can see on screen. If you watch the original template video or you're already using this template from the Patreon, you'll recognize some of the foundations here. Same layout, same routing, just upgraded and cleaner. Think of it like the same studio but organized properly, cables tidied away, and the chair doesn't squeak anymore. If I skim over anything today, it's most likely been broken down in that previous episode in greater detail, so hit that one up next if you want a deep dive. As always, if you want to skip the setup and secrets and jump straight into using this template, it is now available at the Patreon. We actually start our session in the middle here with keys. I often gravitate to the default electric device if I want to quickly choose my key and get a chord progression down. But for you guys, I've also added expressive chords, so if you want to turn that on and quickly get to creating nice jazzy extended chords, then you can do that too. Scrolling to the top of this workflow template, you'll see that I've also got my kind of reference markers here. Intro, drop, drop with energy, break, build, drop to, and outro. This only takes you to a minute, but if you create your thickest section right here in drop, which is why it's looped up first, you can just hit Shift Command and D to insert and duplicate time. And this way you're building all of the sections of your music. All you need to do is expand upon them. Just underneath you have your reference pane if you want to drop any reference tracks, and that's going to the external out as to not be affected by any plugins that you might have on your pre-master or master tracks, which we're going to come to at the end of this video. That's off by default, and underneath that I have the SC sender. This is a sidechain sender which I've built with white noise so that you can actually mold the sound. Again, it's off by default because most of the time you don't want to hear your sidechain sent sound, but if we turn it on, you can hear that it's just white noise, but we can adjust the attack just here, or the decay, and we can adjust the pitch, and whether or not we want it to be white noise at all. If you don't want these notes to be set at quarter notes, then you can just come into the piano roll and select divide by 2 or times 2 to have a faster or slower selection of notes. Inside the template, everything is kind of grouped as your main families of instruments. These aren't supposed to be the only instruments in the track, but it's enough there to get you started and separate your other external instruments into these groups as well. So drums, I'm starting you off with a kick track and a snare track, but also a drum rack if you prefer to finger drum. By the way, if you want to add emojis, then just hit rename and then do Control, Command, and Space to bring up the emojis pane. We'll come to routing in just a bit, but then we have the top drums, main, kind of your main melody or maybe your vocal. This has a sampler in it, splice integration as we've mentioned, and a spare audio track which is off by default. Keys where we started, and then a sample track if you'd like to drop in your chord progressions. We have a group for bass which is started off with a utility to put the bass in mono, a saturator if you want to warm that bass up at all, and then an audio effect rack which is separated into 3 chains, high, mids, and lows. So now you can add effects to maybe the top frequency band and keep the sub nice and clean. We also have a group for resampling. This is met by a resample track that is already set to resampling, and a granulator track as well if you want to do any cool glitchy stuff. An effects group, and then our chains. I've explained the chain groups in a previous workflow video, but essentially it allows your groups to be limited individually so that there's less processing of the frequency band as a whole. He put it best: if your music was a cake that you threw at the bakery window, then all you would see is icing. And we want all of the layers of our music to be heard. So instead of the loudest thing hitting the limiter first and kind of squashing everything else, everything is limited individually so that we get all of the layers of that musical cake together. So as we scroll up to the top of the screen, you'll see that drums is sent to a blank limiter, top drums to the top limiter, main also to blank, chords set to basic limiter, the bass set to a sub limiter, and my resample track set to the basic limiter with effects going to the top limiter. The way that we can do this is if we create a group, we can choose where to send that sound. And when we go down to that group, like the basic limiter, you can set it to no input, in, and then chain capture. Now, bear in mind that this is set to in, so if you want to solo something, you might get no signal when you hit solo. You'll also have to go to something that is set to basic limiter, like the resample track, and hit solo here as well. This all feeds into the chain capture device here, which then goes out to our pre-master track. On my pre-master track, I have the Master 26 effects rack. This effects rack and my go-to effects rack and all my other doohickeys are over at the Patreon, which you can download in a bundle now. The Master 26 track is a utility checker, so you can check when your track is being mastered, if it sounds good in mono, and then if the mid-side area sounds good as well. We close that by default. We go into some EQing. I've already set these shelves up, as well as put our nodes 2 and 3 probably in the areas that you're going to want to reduce. We're doing subtractive EQ in here. You should have done your mixing prior to that on your other tracks. We've got some glue compression. The saturator turned off by default, but when you turn it on, it's at 50% dry wet. So if you want to add a little bit of that kind of analog squeeze, then you can do that with the saturator here. A multi-band compressor, again, off by default and set at 30%. And then another EQ8 to do more subtractive. After any saturator or multi-band compressor, I normally add a roll-off because we get some unnecessary rumbles sometimes. And this EQ8 is set to the mid-side mode so that we can EQ our mono frequencies and our stereo frequencies independently. And then 2 limiters at the end, one color limiter, which you might have to download from Ableton's website. It's absolutely free. This is an older limiter, which adds some saturation as well. And then the final limiter here as standard. Using these 2 limiters in conjunction allows you to normally squeeze like an extra sort of dB or 2 out of your master mix. So with that, you might think, well, what's on main? I'm keeping the main pretty blank. We've got spectrum here in case you want to read those frequencies. I'll normally double click this to make it a little bit bigger. Normally setting my block to 4096 with an average of 6 and a refresh rate of about 80 milliseconds. Then I have a limiter, just cause. I have session notes here by GK. This is absolutely free, but does come in handy if you want to make any notes to yourself, of course. And then the Pomodoro timer. This is the only paid for device in the entire template. I think it's a donation-based piece of software, but it allows me to set a timer inside my Ableton session that I can start. It kind of floats around wherever I leave it on the screen. And then when it finishes, it lets a little ding off letting me know to take a break. And it does that 4 times over before resetting. Oh, I should mention, this video is sponsored by DistroKid. And whilst we're talking about workflow hacks, DistroKid have so many tools to make sure that your music gets out to the right audience, is mixed, and looks professional. I use plenty of their promo tools on the lead up and after my release to make sure that my audience can find my Spotify and other platforms. There's discounts in the description. Let's get back to the episode. I normally leave that down in the bottom left just here. Now, some things that you might have noticed is that I always have this mixer on screen. This allows me to see all of my levels when I'm working in this kind of arrangement window. If I press Command M, you can see that I set a minimum and maximum. So the max level for all of the groups is -1, with the max level of chains and main being 0. And these are all mapped to my Novation keyboard, so I can actually control kind of the mixer on faders, which is really nice. In the mixer view, I'm keeping things like the reference track or the sidechain sender very small, so I don't have to pay too much attention to them. But you'll also see that my reverb and my delay tracks are visible here. They're not visible in the arrangement view. That's because up in the view drop down, we can actually set our arrangement and mixer controls, and I've turned return tracks off by default. So they only appear here. When I click on those returns, I also have a compressor set up so that I can sidechain a sound to itself. That means if I've got reverb on a vocal and I sidechain it to that vocal track, then we're only going to hear the reverbs in the breaths, not over the vocal, so the reverb or the delay doesn't saturate the vocal with unnecessary effects. If I do make these sends visible, you can see that they're being sent to the pre-master. This was a change that I made after my old workflow video. Someone noticed that my sends were just being sent to the main, therefore were coming in much quieter and thinner than everything else that was being mastered in the pre-master track. If I do hit tab and make a full screen mixer view, you can also see that I have my device slots available. This was in that previous options.txt chapter of the video. So all you need to do once enabling that is come over to view, go to mixer controls, and then you'll see device slots and you make sure that that's ticked. I can now see that on this track here, I've got a drum rack, or over here, I have an audio effect rack. This audio effect rack is actually on every track and off by default, so it's not using very much CPU at all. This is my go-to effects rack of 2026. Oftentimes I use the glue compressor. Almost on every track, I'm using the EQ8. At times I'll be using OTT. This is the free OTT by Exfer. I have a utility track so I can put things into mono or automate the gain. And then finally a compressor, which is already set up to external when I turn it on, and the sidechain sender with my threshold all the way to the bottom. So if I want to sidechain something really quickly, that's ready to go just by taking it out of bypass. I understand that these are all small one-click changes, but when you add all of those singular clicks together throughout your session, you're saving so much time by having this stuff ready to go. That's pretty much everything you can see on screen of this workflow template. But if you come to the top of the screen, you'll notice that this says Untitled. And this is because this is my default template when I open Live. To do that, what I do is go to File, Save Live Set as Template. If you're downloading this from the Patreon, it would be called the Routing Template 2026. And once that's saved, I then save Live Set as default set. It will open just like this every time you open Live. There are some other cool hidden features as well, like when you create a new MIDI track or a new audio track, you'll always have the go-to effects 26 rack there by default. You do this by creating a rack of your own, then go into that MIDI or audio track, right-click in, and coming down to save as default MIDI track or save as default audio track. And I think you guys would know this already, but over on the left-hand side, I've cleaned up any unnecessary space. You can come down into places, right-click things, and remove from sidebar if you don't want them to be visible. This works for things like the push if you don't have a push controller. You can also change the name and the default icons here. Up in the top, I've made sure that I've got my collections ready to go with mains, plugins, effects, and my templates here. Just by pressing 1, 2, 3, or 4, you can assign colors to the things that you use the most, and they'll appear up here in collections. So you can see in mains, I have all of my kind of custom racks, most of which are available over at the Patreon. And in plugins, these are mostly my third-party devices that I use on the regular. And then the same goes for effects as well. I really hope that this video was helpful, guys, and illuminated just how much you can do in Ableton Live 12.3. Like I said, you can download this template over at the Patreon to save you building it yourself. And I have about 300 other devices, templates, and breakdowns over there as well. Thanks as always for swinging by, and I'll see you next time.